The following is a conversation with Frank Harmon, an architect who writes, sketches, teaches, and always brings a sketchbook with him. For the past years, ever since 2013, Frank has been publishing sketches paired with mini essays on his blog named Native Places. And in 2018, he packed a collection of more than 60 of these essays in a book that he titled Native Places, Drawing as a Way to See. Hey, it's Nono, and this is the Getting Simple podcast.
I'm Frank Harmon, and I'm the teacher of Nono Martinez.
Yeah, that's right. So that was back in 20...
But now he is my teacher.
Yeah, I have to thank Frank for all the things that he's inspired on me and how my projects have changed because of you. So let's start with why. So I want to know, why do you write?
I write to find out what I'm thinking. I don't write to tell people what I'm thinking. I write to find out what I'm thinking. If I'm puzzled about something, for example, last week I went to see a building by Misanda Row in Chicago called Crown Hall, and it had a very strong effect on me. It was a very famous building. You know, it was built in the 1950s. And I went to a party there in the evening, and I was strongly affected at how quiet and reserved the building was. You know, we're architects at a time when buildings are spectacles. And to see this building, which was so quiet and reserved, I'm trying to write about it now to understand what that meant to me. And I don't have the answer, but I will when I get through writing. Or I'll still have a question, but at least I'll have explored it.
And have you always written as much as you do today?
No, when I was in high school and undergraduate and college, I took a lot of courses in English, and I really loved it. But I never thought of myself as following that in my life. So I've come to writing later in my life again. Some of my best friends are journalists, editors, and novelists. So I'm familiar with their world, but I certainly don't consider myself their equal.
And what was your path? How did you learn how to write?
How did I learn to write? By trial and error. I think the way that we all do, and also by reading good writers. I think the best way to learn to write is to read. And I read Hemingway, Joan Didion, C.S. Forester. I mean, I read everything I can. I still read at least 1 or 2 books a week. And so I think the best training is like, how do you become a good tennis player? You practice. You play tennis every day. And the same is true for writing. You read good things. I don't think anyone can ever teach you to be a writer. Someone can help you and make suggestions, but you'll find your own voice.
I guess you can shape-shift a bit and try to mimic the style of your favorite writers as you learn, or try to I always have this notion that the only people who care about the creative process are other creatives trying to mimic it or trying to get inspired by it or learn from it. So I think when you read as a writer, right, you're not only looking into what this person is trying to inspire, but how this person is conveying things, right? And that might also feed into your work into, let me try this resource or this stylistic approach that he used to introduce a subject or a book or personal experience.
I wanted to say something else now that learning to be an architect is the same. It's the same thing. You're going to learn the most about becoming an architect by going to see good buildings or to walking around in cities. You're not going to become a good architect by sitting at your drawing board late at night, but by going out and visiting places.
Yeah, that's a really good example, because like maybe drawing or writing are something you do at your desk, but you could also learn something from buildings at your desk, and it wouldn't really be the same. It's not the real experience, right? The real experience, I guess, from writing is reading, like you're consuming that thing. But for architecture, you have to wander around the spaces to see the scale and to see the light.
So now I never went to college to study architecture, but he went to Europe and he visited every Le Corbusier building he could find.
As you did. You tried to do that, at least when
I
you
tried
were
to
in
do
London.
the same thing. Yeah, and I think he and I are the same age, so that might have been Ando over there in the corner that I didn't at the Salvation Army building in Paris.
For people, this kind of a bit of hijacking the interview, right? But we have this thing here, right? So it finally got to me.
Oh, I'm so glad you got it.
Yes. So this is Frank's book. So this is Native Places. On the introduction, I already mentioned it. It's Drawing as a Way to See, which Frank has also presented online. It's posted online. I think it was a Clark Nexon and also in a Creative Mornings talk that I link from the show notes. He has described a bit like his experience and why he happened to have a sketchbook everywhere he goes. And one of the things that I enjoyed from the introduction is your contrast between like growing up in Greensboro and going to London. So maybe you can tell us, and then we can continue talking about writing. But can you tell us a bit how do you think that your life changed by going as a youngster and studying and living life in London?
Well, I was introduced to life in a great city. I'd grown up on the edge of a small town in North Carolina, and the town I lived in, architecture wasn't a great issue, certainly not the life of a city. And so to come to London and find just extraordinary scenes on the streets and good newspapers to read, and libraries and parks. Oh my goodness, the parks. They were as carefully tended as somebody's living room. And so I recognized that here was a culture where people cared for their environment, not just their own house and garden or office or classroom, but for the environment that we all share. And that was a way of having a collective, if you will, democratic life by taking care of the place and making it a better place for people to meet. So that was a revelation to me. I had never experienced something like that. And it was thrilling. Now, you, of course, grew up in a different world, and a more urbane and sophisticated with an older culture. So it might not have been such a surprise to you to move to London as it was for me. What I want to ask you, if I may, what it was like to come to America to study.
Well, I always mention how I feel like the approach there is a lot more pragmatic, like how, you can, I keep this in mind, right? Like we could have like a 500-page book on our table and our notes while we were doing a like structures exam, something that would be unthinkable back in Spain. But even if you don't have time to use the book during the exam, right? So it assumes that you've learned and you're going to be applying things that you've learned as you will in the real world, right? You have access to all the information in the world, but still you need to think, you need to know how to use those tools. It's basically something that here it seems that we tend to memorize things more. And it's a bit of a different approach. Yet I think the 3 years I had before I went to study and had the chance to take your class, we were really overwhelmed by school. And I think in North Carolina I had the time to like lay back a bit and like look at things a bit more relaxed way and enjoy more the process, not just thinking about like what is the grade that I'm gonna get, right? I actually went to the US in 2006 for the first time. It was striking. It was like I kind of got in love with going abroad. Not just I went to Indiana, which is like a really small town or like a village inside of Pennsylvania, so it's not the larger state. And I was surprised of like how different culture was, like how just some things that today I think because of globalization are widespread, which you also talk a bit about in your writing in our previous conversation, right? How we're so digitally connected now that we forget about the place we live in. And there were still like huge differences that I think now are easy now because everything is super fast everywhere in the world and we're kind of adopting the same technology and the same way of living anywhere you are, at least on the more developed countries. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's also this really silly experience that there was my colleague was like calling on his phone somebody that was outside on the track of the car because it was like raining a bit instead of going out and talking to him, right? So it was kind of an advancement on technology. It's like these people, how are they doing this, right? You had free calls while we had to pay for every single minute and message we sent. And that was something I couldn't imagine. Like he's calling somebody right out the same car instead of just like opening the window or something like that. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I've been to the US and then Australia and then London and then back to the US, and I ended up coming back to my hometown, right? Like I enjoy it. The weather here is like a miracle and we have really good conditions here. Probably professionally, not so much. I mean, I keep working for an American company remotely. So that talks a lot about opportunities that we have here. I might not be able to develop the same skills in my hometown if it not were for remote work, which is slightly sad. And yeah, what else can I emphasize? Oh, but the first thing is like everyone seemed to be more focused on trying to figure out what they wanted to do, right? Like here in Spain, we just like seems like we continue going, like not really thinking what's ahead of us. And the concept of freshman students not having defined their major, right? Like it's still like trying things out. I think that I liked a lot because that defines me a bunch. Like I struggle a lot defining what I want to do in terms of like establishing a roadmap, but I'm really good at just like getting different things and tinkering around. So yeah, I don't know. That was a long answer. I hope you can get something out of that.
I did, thank you.
Okay, so maybe I have some more comments on that you mentioned on our previous conversation, right? On your kind of talk, when you talk about drawing as a way to see, you talk about this childhood place. Maybe you can comment a bit where that concept comes from and what it means, because I think that really talks about rooting you to a place and determining your life experience, and then that contrast to the current detachment of like living in a globalized world.
Well, my psychologist friend is telling me that by the time we're 5 years old, we've learned 80% about what we need to know about the world. That's because when we're young, we are just these absolute magnets for senses and information. Look at any child 3 years old, and she picks up an object, she looks at it, she smells it, she licks it, she throws it. She's fascinated with anything that's physical. That kind of curiosity, if we pay attention to it, can stay with us for the rest of our lives. Unfortunately, many of us lose that sense of curiosity. But it's that childhood experience of looking at the world anew. You know, Henry David Thoreau, our great American philosopher and writer who built a cabin at Walden, wrote once that every child discovers the world anew. In other words, each of us, when we're born, we discover the world for the first time on our own terms. And that gives us incredible insight into what's around us. That's why when I think about how to teach, one of the first things I do is that I get my students to describe their favorite childhood place. And, I usually give them a week to do this. And I say, you can't use digital. You can't use photographs. You got to use your hands and your head and your heart. And you've got to illustrate the favorite place in your childhood. For one student, it was a wall with a hole in it and a big tree beyond. And he would go through that hole in the wall and find the tree and climb up in that tree. For another student, it was riding on the back of her father's bicycle to the beach, where they would play in the rocks and the sand. Both of these students were from China. And what I noticed is that no matter where children were from, this favorite childhood experience usually took place when they were about 7 years old and there were no parents. And they were usually by themselves. Peter Zumthor, who's an architect that I admire greatly, writes about his favorite childhood place. It was his grandmother's kitchen. And not only that, it was the doorknob in his grandmother's kitchen. And just imagine this architect who does such extraordinary work relies on those childhood impressions and experiences to give meaning to his work that he does today, not only in Switzerland, but, in Germany and Los Angeles. I think these childhood experiences are very important. And if you can keep them with you, you always had them. Someone said that genius, it was Baudelaire who said this, he said that genius is the ability to recall your childhood at any time. To go back to that clarity and authenticity of your childhood vision. That's genius. That's probably why Picasso thought that any child's painting was better than what he could do.
You mentioned on your talk that Picasso himself said that he couldn't match what a 5-year-old could do.
Absolutely. No one can. And here's another interesting thing. Children draw, right? Children draw like crazy. My wife, Judy, the first thing she did when our children were little was she set up an easel in a breakfast nook. And the easel always had newsprint on it and about 6 pots of paint and brushes, So our children could just go over there and paint something when they felt like it and then buzz off and do something else. And I've still got some of those paintings up in their bedrooms. They're fantastic. Yeah.
That a bit talks about creative friction as well, right? It's something I talked to Jordan Gray about, right? Like that fact of maybe putting some tools with easy access that when you feel like it, you might just get around and do it. Not having to open the wardrobe and put the table or put the pens and take things out, but just be able to get it and start doing.
I mean, it's why in the kitchen you got the salt and pepper and the herbs and spices right out there, right? You don't want to have to go to another room to get them.
Yeah, otherwise you'll be cooking without salt.
Exactly. So if you're going to cook, you need the salt right there.
Yeah, we're lazy as humans.
Well, and that's why I always carry a sketchbook, and I'll bet you do too.
Yeah, I try. I have three main different sizes because, they
Yep,
always don't fit, like
yep,
A4s or A5 or A6.
absolutely. Well, you have a wonderful skill at drawing, and I'll bet you started drawing when you were about 2 or 3 years old. I'll have to ask your mom about that.
Yeah, I do have many of my early childhood drawings.
Well, keep them. They'll be more and more valuable to you later. I mean, I've kept all my children's drawings.
So how do you think growing up glued to a screen will change the life of today's kids? How do you think that will be different?
Well, that's an interesting question because children now are growing up with phones and tablets. I wish I knew the answer. I like to think that all of these disciplines can coexist. For example, no, draw beautifully, but at the same time, you're also very skilled in digital representation, and you have an iPhone, and you carry that, and you carry your sketchbook. So ideally, I think they all reinforce each other. I'm not against drawing digitally, but at the same time, I believe that there are certain things that we get by drawing with our hand that connects to our brain and even our heart in a way that's harder to do with a keyboard and a screen. And, no, I can look at buildings now, new buildings, and I can tell you whether they were the result of a sketch or whether they were born on a screen, and most of them were born on a screen. And you can tell they don't have the sense of tactile quality, of touch, of scale. They seem to disregard the human being. They're made of slick materials that don't attract us. So I love the computer. Lord, it was such a resource in our office. But at the same time, I don't think it replaces skills like hand drawing.
Yeah, now that you say that, that was really striking when I flew, metaphorically from North Carolina to Sydney, Australia, because there, some
Yeah.
of the people in the studio, they got a project brief. Basically, you need to do
Yeah,
3 stories housing, because
Yeah.
you're an
Yeah.
architect. Some people might not know. You basically got told what you need to do, and then first day of class, they come with a 3-dimensional Rhino model, like a sketch.
It's like, no, with SketchUp.
And I was like, is this really happening? Like, how can you jump directly to detailing something that is so unknown with like such accurate measures, right? Because when you make a plane on a hand drawing, you can leave it open, you can leave it abstract, but in 3D it is. It has a height, it has a thickness, it has a place.
I know. Don't you find, that in design, it's a process of coming from the unknown to the known? You're gradually finding your way out of the shadows into something that's clearer, and you're trying to understand it. And you sketch a little bit, and you throw that away, and sketch some more. And I think that's a natural process of design. Just like I was saying, writing is about discovery. It's not about explanation, or statements. It's about discovery. And design is about discovery, ideally, right?
Yeah. And I think at least what I do is like you have that process from like hand sketches into adding more detail. And if you continue on the more handmade medium, you can not detail so much the things that are unclear until you have to like maybe make it into a more detailed plan or model. So I guess it's true what you said, like you start defining more and more as you know more of the project, and then there's this time where you can say, okay, now we can formalize this as a 3D model or like a 2-dimensional digital drawing.
That's right. And I also think that design has to do with touch. Are you familiar with the essay by Johanny Polazner called The Eyes of the Skin? We might have talked about this. He talks about how today we give precedence to vision, to sight, to images. But at other times in history, people paid attention to other senses. In the 16th century, for example, the primary sense was sound. People listened. And that's how they got their information. For example, Shakespeare wrote plays for people who couldn't read. That's why his language is so marvelous and full of color and life and smells and touch. And so we sort of lost contact with our senses by making everything depend on the visual. And coming back to drawing, it's no accident that when we draw, we touch. We're touching a pen or a pencil, and we're touching a piece of paper, which is either rough or smooth, or we're using a Conte crayon, you know. And so I feel like it brings touch back to architecture that way. Or it's a way that we can bring touch. You know, going back to that building I saw by Mies van der Rohe, I wanted to go up and touch it. You know, there was just something so appealing about that building. Just like when you see a dear friend, you want to hug them. It's touch. And, you know, we're in danger of losing that in architecture. You know, my son lives in London, and whenever I go to see him, I like to wander around the city. And my favorite parts of the city are the Georgian 18th century, the squares, and they're made of brick, and they have substance to them. And he lives right next to the city of London, which is probably the single most expensive square mile in the world. And people will spend more money on glass and bronze and stainless steel. And it's a completely dead city, you know? It's all slick and smooth, and your eye longs for something like a hot dog cart, you know, in an environment like that.
So you also mentioned that the world is becoming totally placeless.
That is true. And part of that's because of the iPhone in our pocket. I love all that my iPhone gives me. You know, I've got more on my iPhone than King Louis XIV had in his entire library. So the resources are extraordinary. But at the same time, it allows us to perhaps ignore what we're seeing around us and focus more on that screen.
Getting back again to your question of like, what do you think of when you travel to the US? That was a time in which there were still goods that were belonging to a given place, right? So we had stores that we didn't have back home, right? And then when you go there, you tend to buy things because you like that brand or maybe you want to taste that cheesecake or that hamburger or something like that. But then what's happened since then, that's probably, it's almost going to be 20 years. Like it's 16 years now.
No, has it been that long? Wow.
Well, it's 11 years since I met you, but 16 years, I think, since the first time I went to the US. Yeah, so something like that. And what happened back then doesn't happen now, right? Like the food chains are now in Europe and clothing chains are here in Europe. If they're not, you can buy the clothes online. There was something special about maybe traveling overseas and say, okay, I like this Levi's brand or this other brand that only exists in, I don't know, maybe in Japan or something. They have a shop here. So I'm going to buy a few things and those are precious.
Yeah, Muji is everywhere.
Exactly. So now, even for me, like now Muji I can buy online. I have this Muji pen with me.
I know. Yes.
we have it in Madrid, right? But
Yeah.
there used to be something about the place.
Yes. Well, look. Here's the thing. We're never going to get rid of, once we've bought into the digital internet world, we're never going to get rid of it. But it seems to me even more important that when we make a place, a classroom, a cafe, a living room, that we make that really situated in its place so that we've got something physical and concrete that grounds us in an otherwise unlimited digital world. It's like your two friends in the car, rather than roll down the window, they looked at their screens.
That happened, kind of making a conceptual overview. That happened because it's more profitable for the brands that just can spread overseas, and then they can sell you here. So you don't have to leave it only for the people who can travel and get the goods, right?
Well, we can take advantage of people in China and India who work for less. That's what it's all about. We can make things much more cheaply, and then we can spread them all over the world. My friends here think that the greatest enemy to global warming is fast fashion. It's producing more and more goods.
Yet I think there is this movement, and again, it's because of profitability, that brands that are located everywhere around the world, right? You have we have now a Starbucks like 2 minutes by my house here in Malaga.
No.
It's crazy, right? And what brands are starting to do is that they're trying to make products that are only specific to a region, right? Just because I see this burger chain, fast food chain everywhere, right? But maybe now I get hooked into going because in North Carolina they happen to have this special meal that is not anywhere else, right? Trying to return to like a regional sense, because that also gives to another kind of marketing. But yeah, anyhow, like I agree, it's like a bit of like a cultural globalization, and we can do anything about it. We got into it.
Well, and it's too late to stop that. But what we can do as architects and artists and writers is give people a sense of place where they are. And those are the architects and the artists and the writers that I follow. People like Alice Munro in Canada, architects like Marlon Blackwell in Arkansas, writers like William Faulkner.
So I have a few more that you've mentioned on your talks. I've been watching you, Frank. So you mentioned also Glenmurcutt in Australia.
I love Glenmurcutt.
Tom Kundig.
Yep. Tom Kundig.
Ted Flato.
Rick Joy in Arizona. Bridget Shim and Howard Sutcliffe in Canada. Brian McCallions in Nova Scotia. Patricia Patkow in Vancouver. Larry Scarpa in Los Angeles.
Maybe now you can tell us, this is usually how you've started this, like the narrative of your talks, is like, why are tobacco barns properly oriented, and why are they all slightly different?
Well, they're all the same and they're all different. They're all the same because a tobacco plant is about 4 feet tall. And so they hang the tobacco plants in the barn to dry. And so that's a kind of a module of 4 feet. And 2 acres of tobacco will fill a barn that's about 24 feet by 24 feet by 24 feet high. So all over eastern North Carolina, you see these buildings that are like little cubes. And they have a gable roof like a Greek temple. And so they're all the same in that way. Because the size of a plant and the size of the farm in a way, right? It's a labor-intensive crop. But they're all different because they're used at different times of the year. For example, in August, that's when you start picking the tobacco leaves. And you need a place to do that, to sort them out in the shade. So a farmer is going to build a shed on the side of his barn where there's a lot of shade in the summer. That's usually the south side. Sometimes it's the east side because you'll work in the afternoon and the east side will be shaded. It's never on the north side because there's no breeze. And then at other times in the winter, the farmer wants to store his tools, like his wagon and stuff like that. So if you build another shed and he knows where the bad weather is going to come from in the winter, it's usually from the northeast. So the shed's going to be on the opposite side. So every farmer would customize, if I can use that word, his standard tobacco barn to fit the place where it was in the environment. And I discovered this on my own. I'm a visual learner. It's hard for me to learn from books. And so when I came back to North Carolina as a young architect, I'm always hungry for things that I see that I can learn from. And I started noticing these barns and how they were so related to the place that they're in. And you can see one of these barns today and you know which way is north, just by the way the farmer put the shed on it. And I can promise you the farmer knew which way was north.
And if you want to hear more about this, I'll point to those talks as well on the show notes. They were really revealing for me. They kind of reminded me things and also a lot of learning.
Glenn Burkett that we were talking about, I asked him once, what's the most important thing about designing a building? And he said, the way the wind blows. I thought that was wonderful. He said that's the first thing he sorts out, where the wind blows, where the good winds are and where the bad winds are.
And I think people can't imagine how often architects don't pay attention to that.
Not at all.
I gotta take here a diversion. I'm so tired of, now that I'm into the kind of the job of finding another, maybe a house to buy or a house to rent. I'm so annoyed by how few buildings are actually well designed for people to live properly on them. People just develop to make money. It's just business, but you can see, how can you repeat the same typology over a round community or a square community with the same exact typology everywhere? You're assuming that at least one, 3/4 of the community is not going to have the ideal plan because you're just copying around the same one. So what do you think of that? Why does that keep happening?
Well, it's a little depressing. A, that people would do that and not pay more attention. But B, because the people who buy or rent these places have so little discernment or feel like they have so little power in what makes a good room or a house. So it's a little depressing. We're losing the battle on that one. But the only thing one can do is to try to design good buildings that people will notice.
I wonder, is that what the kind of the finger from Frank Gehry was about? You're talking about how many buildings are badly designed?
Yes, I think so. For one reason or another. We all want to do buildings that are beautiful and that serve people. But that rarely happens. And, why is that? And it's usually out of the architect's hands.
Which is sad.
It is sad. So,
because we're running out of time, I'm going to ask you some things that I had here that I really want to know because as you know, I do sketch every day and want to learn more about your project. A comment here. So my Sketches newsletter was highly inspired by how Frank initiated his own project. And his project is at nativeplaces.org. So you can see his, I think right now, bi-weekly sketches there. Or you can get as well his book, which I highly recommend, Native Places, Drawing as a Way to See, and a link from the notes, where he has an introduction, explains a bit where the project comes from, and he also packs by different themes, like a set of like 60 plus of those pairs of sketches and essays, or mini essays, right? 200 words or less.
200 words or less. Yep.
That's Frank's goal in life. Short sentences.
Well, it's also because most of us have a short attention span now.
When and why did you start pairing your sketches with these little stories and publishing them online?
When did I start doing that and why? Well, I've always had a sketchbook all my life, and I make a sketch a day. And I've always been interested in writing, but so 9 years ago, my wife died, and in this unlimited grief that I inhabited, I was looking for things to do that could sort of take my mind off of sadness. And I thought, maybe if I took one of my sketches and tried to write about it, that would give me something to do. I was looking for something to do. And so I found a sketch. Actually, it was a kind of a little log cabin in Virginia. But it happens to have been the log cabin that the fourth president of the United States lived in, James Monroe. And, he started out as a poor farmer. And so I wrote about it. And I wrote 200 words. And I called it Native Places because I wanted to write about places that had a sense of belonging to where they are, what we've been talking about. That's how I started. And I sent them I had a mailing list at that time, address book at that time, maybe of 300 people. So I sent it to all 300 people, and I said, if you like this, go to nativeplaces.org, and I'll send you one every 2 weeks. So that's how I started.
Nice. That's a good technique as well. So like you have like maybe people in mind that you think that are going to like the project.
It was people I knew, and now there are 5,000 people.
Nice. That was one of the questions that I was going to ask you. I was curious. Well, thanks a lot before we keep talking for sharing that. Like I know that, I can't imagine, but like that's probably been one of the most important times in your life, like really hard times. And I'm really, really happy that you found something to keep you going and a motivation that, I'm sure that those 5,000 subscribers are getting inspired by and connecting, have a sense of feeling to you and highlighting the importance of making each place special.
Well, I hope so. And let's go back to one more thing about writing. A very wise person, he's actually my brother-in-law, Henry Woodhead, is a very fine writer and was also an editor. And he said, the best way to write is to imagine that you're talking to a friend. And that's why I enjoy talking to you. and when I write Native Places, well, really, I'm writing it as though I'm talking to you.
I have here said by you the two most important purposes of making a sketch. Do you remember those?
I sure do. One is to try to understand what you're looking at, whether it's a fire hydrant or a cathedral. Why is it that shape or that color? Why is it made of iron? And the second reason is so that I'll remember it. Le Corbusier kept a sketchbook all his life. And when he was, maybe 30 years old, he went to Hadrian's villa in Tivoli outside Rome, and he made some sketches of it. And lo and behold, 50 years later, when he designs the chapel at Rochon, he uses those sketches to inspire those beautiful shapes that let the light come in. So you don't forget it, that you make a sketch. I could look at a sketch that I made on a mountain in Greece when I was 22 years old, and I can tell you who was with me and which way the wind was blowing, because you'll never forget it.
I want to thank you a lot for your time, for sharing your thoughts, and for talking to me as a friend. So I'll let you go and enjoy July 4th. Have a really nice day. Okay.
Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hopefully someday we can see each other in person.
I'm counting on it.
Okay. Bye, Frank, now. Thanks. Before you go, I'd like to remind you that you can find detailed episode notes at gettingsimple.com, and that you can submit questions for this or any past episodes at gettingsimple.com/ask. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.